he called me again, and he said, "How would you like to go to Music Under the Stars?" And I thought, well, that's a good thing to do. We can talk and we can listen to music, and it doesn't cost anything. That's a good way to begin. And so my cousin was visiting me, and she was a little tiny gal, and she had been there for Sunday night supper, which was always a big deal at our house. And I went back to get my clothes changed, and I said, "Mary, go out in front when he comes in the front door. Tell me if I can wear heels or not." That was very important, whether I could wear heels or not. She came back and she said, "You can wear the highest heels you want. He's really tall." So we went out that night, had a really nice time. We went dancing afterwards. I remember he smelled very good. He smelled nice and clean. And we danced and talked and came home. There was no suggestion that he might call me again. And I thought, well, so I waited until about Wednesday, I think. And said to my mom, "Well, I think that's that." And he called again and asked me to Music Under the Stars.
I was a big spender and remain a big spender.
But he pulled this deal of not asking me right away. He always kept me, waiting.
What was that about, Paul? This kind of...
You act like it was a concerted plan on my part, which it wasn't, of course. I was just conservative.
And then he went to summer camp. He was in the Army at the time, reserves, and he went away for 2 weeks. And he said he would write me, and I never got a letter from him.
How come you didn't write?
I wrote, but like people still do today, I thought that I was writing to Toledo, and the address should have been Maumee. So the letter never got to her until after I got home.
No, it got there about 2 days before you got home, because I thought, well, I got a card. I'll still remember what it said. On the outside, it had a picture of a very sad dog, and it said, "Since you've been away," and inside it said, "I've led a dog's life." And I thought, I think that will tell him something. So I mailed it to his house, and I guess it told him something, because he called me again.
Now, this courtship proceeded fairly quickly, correct? Paul?
Well, when I finally got the courage to ask the question, the answer was not yes, it was when.
Well, we met in July. He went away 2 weeks later. We started dating again, and then pretty soon we were seeing each other every night. And by my birthday, which is in October, I thought, what's taking him so long? I'm ready. Why isn't he? But we really were both. I was 24, almost 25. He was 26. We were both pretty settled. We knew a lot of people in common. Our parents were checking on each other. We just had a lot of people that knew us and said, "Oh, she's good, he's good," that sort of thing. And I felt very comfortable with him. I thought, he is exactly who he says he is. And he was exactly who he said he was. And I thought he was honest, and I liked him. I loved him. But it took him until...
I don't know. You have the date engraved on the bottom of your foot.
Took him till November to ask me. And I did say when. I was ready to go.
So met in July, proposed in November.
Mm-hmm.
What did you see in Carol that you liked?
She laughed a lot. She had curly hair. She was blonde at that time, produced blonde, I believe.
No, not then.
You were really a blonde then?
Really a blonde.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I never thought anything. I didn't know where this place was that I was going to pick her, because I just drove out here and presented myself at the door, and I drove in this driveway, and I thought I was driving to Wasion, because to me it was a long drive, because my house, the driveway is about 30 feet long, so it was quite a change for me. But I really haven't made a list of your attributes then or now, but they all worked out just fine. Turns out my judgment was awesome.
But your brothers, I'm sure, were keeping a close eye on things. You might want to talk a little bit about your brothers and what they thought of Paul and how all that worked out.
Well, my brothers by that time were all married, or I don't think he would have survived, because when my brothers were living at home, any guy who came into my house really got the business. But even then, my brother John lived right next door, and he used to come over and check them over. I don't think he did that to Paul, but the very first time that Paul came and met my whole family, he had met Mom and Dad, of course, but he met my whole family. We were having a picnic, and I don't remember how many grandchildren there were. I would say about 25 or so grandchildren at that time. And Paul was playing golf that afternoon. It was a Sunday, and I went out to greet him as he came across the yard, and he had to quit the golf game to get to the picnic, and I thought, oh, this is not a good omen.
I was playing at Ottawa Park, and I don't know what your recollection of that course is, but through 15 I was one over, and I had to leave the golf course, and that would have been the best score I ever shot there if I had been able to just par in. But my duty called, she said. So come out, and as she said, lots of little grandchildren, and all of her brothers and their wives, but I would never got any feeling that there was anything. They were all just old dirty farmers, and I fit right into that.
Yeah. Paul's an only child, so of course it was quite a change from what he was used to, and he has no first cousins that he grew up with. So this extended family was just an eye-opener to him. My sisters-in-law really gave him the once-over. I could feel their eyes on him, assessing him, you know. The boys were all pretty decent. I was pretty pleased. Maybe they were thinking I was a hopeless case and let's get rid of her sometime, but I don't know. They were pretty nice. When he did come out to talk to my father, my mother knew. I used to share everything with Mom, and my mother knew that he was coming out to ask for my hand, and so she had said something to Dad. And you'll have to tell about your...
Well, between their house and John and Mary Kay's house, there's a space that was converted into a squash court, and he was playing squash with John when I came, and he wasn't so-called ready to greet me in any kind of a formal way. So he came in to his house, walked through the kitchen, walked through the hallway, and into the music room where I was planted, and he had a Collingwood Presbyterian red sweatshirt on. His hair was white as it was from the time he was 30 years old or thereabouts, and that's going 14 ways. And he said something like, "You're going to marry my daughter, huh?" And that was the end of that, and he went back and took a shower.
I think what what I remember him saying is, "To hell with you for taking my daughter away from me," but he was smiling.
Well, I don't remember that text, but
Dad and Mom both liked him very much, right from the beginning. There was no thought that he wasn't going to be a good son-in-law.
When was your wedding?
In May.
May 21.
The following spring.
Any special memories of that day?
Oh, it was a gorgeous day, for one thing. In those days, Catholics had to be married in the morning, because if we wanted to go to communion, which we did, we had to be fasting from midnight before. And so our Mass was at 11:30, and we had the reception out here at the farm, which was sort of unusual. Most people went to the Park Lane or someplace like that. Weddings were much simpler then. If you had music, you didn't have a band, you didn't dance. usually the food was very simple, but we had a meal. And we had umbrella tables outside, and we had strolling violinists, and they sang, and it was, I remember it as a wonderful affair.
Harold's only daughter.
You know,
Really?
we were very willing to have a very simple wedding. In fact, that would have been my preference, but Dad said, I can't do that. 5, your brothers have all had weddings given by somebody else. And he said, you're my only chance to have a wedding. And so I said, you do whatever you want. That's fine with me. And I worked right up to the day before the wedding, so Mom planned it with me, but I wasn't around a whole lot, and it was just really a very lovely affair. And I think it was really nice for Paul's mom and dad because, of course, he was their only chance for a wedding too. So we have great memories, I think, of that wedding. I remember being really happy to leave it. I remember driving away and thinking, phew, and I'm sure a lot of brides and grooms think that, everything had gone fine. And I remember wearing a corsage, and the first thing I did when I got on the airplane before we flew to New York was take that corsage off and stuff it in a pocket because I didn't want anybody to know that we were newlyweds. Everybody knew we were newlyweds.
You could hide that.
Yeah, right.
Honeymoon in New York City?
No, we stopped there.
Where was the honeymoon?
Bermuda.
Yeah.
The Elbow Beach Surf Club, as I recall.
How was that?
Wonderful. We had a great time. I think he thought he married a truck driver. I ate like a truck driver. I gained 10 pounds in 10 days. I had lost a lot of weight before the wedding. I think a lot of brides do that too, but I thought, oh my Lord, we had so much fun. Well, all we did was eat and drink. I mean, we'd eat breakfast and we'd go to the beach, and then we'd come back and we'd have hamburgers on the beach for lunch, and we'd go on with a beer, and then we'd go to her. Right, I wasn't a drinker at all, and so I had a beer with the hamburger, and then we'd go to the swimming pool and we'd have Planter's Punch with rum, and then we'd take a nap, and then we'd have dinner, So, but we had a marvelous time.
Sounds like the perfect honeymoon.
It was.
10 pounds, Carol, 10 pounds.
10 pounds. Yep. Got pregnant on my honeymoon, so I never lost the 10 pounds.
So back home, let's talk about the first house you moved into.
1700 block of Bancroft, and I lived with my parents at 1730. Our new home was 1724, right across the driveway, so I was able to install a couple of eye bolts, one in each house, and pulleys, and I just put my clothes on hangers and pulled them across the rope and put them in from closet A to closet B. It was very easy to move in.
What was that like for you, Carol, to move away from the farm into the city and then be next door to Paul's parents?
She knew what a curb was.
I had to be taught what a curb was. I kept calling Bancroft a road. He said, no, you lived on a road. You live on a street now. We had all sorts of dire predictions made about living next door to my mother and father-in-law.
The two kitchens looked right into one another across the driveway. We
shared a backyard, and so we were very, very close to them. But my heavens, my family had all lived together. Our next door neighbor said to me one day, did you have a fight with your family? And I said, no, why? And he said, well, why are you living here? And I said, well, my husband lives here. I plan to live with him. And he said, I thought you all had to live on the farm. I said, whoever told you that? No, we aren't obliged to live on the farm. So, and Paul's mother had been told by some of her friends that she would be cooking for us and so forth. And so there were lots of people that thought this wasn't going to work. But we lived there 8 years, and they were very, very happy years. His mom and dad couldn't have been more wonderful to us. They were very generous. When we had children, the children loved to go over and visit them. I think I hurt Nana at the beginning by telling her I wasn't going to use her as a babysitter because it was too easy to do that, and I would never feel that if I was doing something selfish, like going out to lunch with somebody, I didn't want her stuck with my work. So, and I think after we had more than two, she was probably glad that we had made that rule, but I always felt that their association with the grandchildren should be fun for them and not ever a burden.
September of 1957, shortly after I graduated from law school, I went on active duty, 6 months at Fort Knox, and when I came back, then it was time to look for a job, and through a friend of my parents, I landed with Frank Cubbin and Bernie Rice, who had offices downtown in the security building. And there were just the three of us in the office. And they concentrated on plaintiff's personal injury work. And it sort of fell to me to do everything else that came into the office. And part of that was preparing wills, taking care of the administration of estates, and that really was the groundwork for my doing what I'm still doing today. I enjoyed that particular kind of work, but I was with them for 4 years, and then had an opportunity to move to Marshall Melhorn, which I did, and I've been there ever since.
Of course, 9 months after your marriage, you had your first child. Talk about that a little bit, that first child. And
the first child,
yes.
Well, the first child was John, and I still remember the thrill of having Paul come home and go into the dining room where I kept the bassinet and pull up a dining room chair and just look at him. And I don't think there's anything more thrilling for a mom than to see her husband look at their baby. And he was such a good dad right away. It just fell into it like he had done it all his life. And he had never been around babies at all, I don't think, had you?
No, no experience.
And so it was wonderful, and of course his mom and dad were so thrilled to have a grandson. And although Nana really, really wanted a granddaughter, and we hoped and eventually did have a granddaughter for her, but she was thrilled with this first baby. So we were very, very lucky.
One of the exciting parts about that is that I don't remember who our insurance carrier, my insurance carrier was at the time, but John was born just a little bit too soon after we were married, and so the nice claim adjuster said, "Sorry, Mr. Kraus, you don't get any insurance coverage for your medical expenses and hospital expenses," so we had an opportunity to pay those ourselves.
Can you imagine, on the day of our wedding, how things have changed? On the day of our wedding, we had to call the insurance people to say we were married. And the baby was born 10 days short of our 9 months. And they made no allowances for all of our children were early, everyone but one. Were early. Didn't make any difference. I felt like I should have a scarlet A when I came out of the hospital, a wanton woman, and my doctor couldn't do anything about it. So, a little different from now, but of course it didn't cost very much to have a child in those days either.
I assume you were planning on having a large family, but initially it didn't turn out that way. Could you talk a little bit about how that all developed?
Well, we had 2 miscarriages after John, and the second one was long. Very frequently women miscarry in the first 3 months if they're going to miscarry, and the second one was beyond that. And my doctor, who was really a fertility doctor, had no idea what was the problem. And we did a lot of fiddling around, hoping that my system would get whatever was wrong would be corrected. But in the meantime, Paul and I discussed, and we had discussed this before we were married, were we both open to adoption if we couldn't have children? And both of us were. And we started discussing the fact that it would be nice to have a second child close to John, and if we waited until all my system was all back to normal, if it ever was going to be, it would be nice to adopt. And so we began adoption proceedings with Catholic Charities, And in those days, if you had a child, it was very difficult to get a second child when he or she was a baby, but they could adopt through either Ireland or Canada from Quebec. And so we chose Quebec because it was closer for one reason. And they picked out a child. It turned out to be Joe, and we went to Quebec to pick Joe up. And the doctors had warned, the people at the foundling home had warned us that they might be that he might be afraid of Paul, because the only men that these children saw were doctors, white coats, and they were sort of afraid because it meant shots and all the things that go along with that. And he had been raised in a room with 15 little boys. 3 adults were with him all the time. He had never been outdoors. He was fed in a room that was full of high chairs, and he was bathed in a room that was full of little bathtubs.
Mention how old he was at the time.
He was 15 months, so he was a toddler, and he toddled. He was a little chub, and it was an interesting thing to have our child walk in to greet us. And he came in, and he went right over to Paul, and Paul picked him up, and he got keys out of his pocket. Do you remember that? And they started playing with the keys. Never any problem at all.
He was right in the midst of chicken pox, which made him particularly attractive.
He looked like a little leopard. Well, actually, he was finished with him. He was no longer contagious. But we took him home all spotted. We got on the airplane with him all spotted. But
what year was this?
1963. He was born in 62. The 2 brothers were brothers.
Now, did you think that was going to be it? That you were going to have these 2 kids, and maybe adopt more children, or what was your thoughts there?
We were on our way to adopting another child. And we had to change agencies because we could no longer go through Catholic Charities because 2 was enough. They didn't have enough babies. So we went through the Lutheran agency, and we had gone through the home study, which meant that we were 6 weeks. They had picked out the mother. This baby was going to be born in Toledo. And we were 6 weeks from having the baby when I found out I was pregnant. So I called the agency and I said, save our file, don't put it away. I'll call you when we have the baby, but if something happens, we want to go on.
What was that like when you found out that you could conceive again and did,
As a small miracle. We were thrilled. I guess I was thrilled and nauseated. I was always nauseated in my early pregnancies. But we were both very happy about it.
Oh, sure.
And Gretchen was born, and then whatever was wrong wasn't wrong anymore. We had Sue 18 months later, and on and on.
On it went. So 4 kids in Bancroft Street, no more room, so you had to move on. So where did you go from there?
2130 Potomac Drive in Westmoreland.
We really only looked in Westmoreland because, well, we loved the neighborhood. We loved the old houses and the variety. It was integrated. We liked that. We liked the thought. There were old people and young people and black people and white people, and we liked that mix. And we liked the fact that kids could walk to school from there. And most importantly, we wanted to be close to Paul's mom and dad because we knew the day would come when they would depend on us. So we started looking in Westmoreland, and we looked at a number of houses, and the one we ended up with, Paul didn't even want to look at because it was stucco. It's a Spanish house, and I loved the looks of the house. It was a spooky house when he was a kid, and it was always covered by shrubbery, and it was dark, and an old woman lived in it, and he didn't even want to look at it, and he didn't like the fact that it was stucco. He said that's nothing but repair. But it had been owned by Charlie Gallagher, and I knew that they had renovated it, and I understood that it was very nice inside. And so our realtor said, you really should just go in and look at it because it will give you an idea of what you can do with one of these old houses, because we had looked at a number of them that really did need a lot of renovation. And we walked in, and He knew he was sunk. I loved it. I just loved it.
Who came next?
Tom. Tom came next.
And what year would that have been? What year did we move in there?
Let's see. We were it's 1968. Correct.
Right. Yeah. He was born in August of '68.
But meanwhile, you still had a connection to the Anderson family farm.
Well, that happened when Gretchen was born. I was still involved with the summer camp. I wasn't actively working in it, but I was directing it still. There was a little house on our property not too far from the swimming pool that my aunt had lived in, and it was really just a box. It had a living room, which was a combination living room, dining, or living room, bedroom when she was there. It had a screened-in porch. It had a large bathroom and closet. And my dad said, why don't we add on to the little house, which we had called it when Aunt Kit lived in it, and you could come out here in the summertime, direct the summer camp, and then you could go back in the winter. So that's what we did. It was added on to that summer. And every year from then on, as soon as the kids were out of school.
That was the day that school was over. When are we going to the farm?
Well, they were out here with all their cousins. At that time, the only cousin that didn't live out here, John lived here, Tom lived here, Bob lived close, Don and Dick. So 4 of my 5 brothers and all of their children lived here. And so we had work crews. We had the older cousins in charge of the younger cousins. They had the red team and the blue team, so they were vying for who did the best job. Our kids had summer employment, for which they were paid, and they had a boss who oversaw what they were doing. And then they had this great place to play and run. They had a swimming pool. They were in the summer camp one day a week where they were instructed in all sorts of things. So they really, it was like a vacation for them too, except for the work part, which the parents liked. We loved it.
Carol's dad had a philosophy, work is a blessing, and it was very good that they had the opportunity to learn how to work. And they started to work, I think, in 2nd grade, and maybe their shift was an hour.
It was, for which they got a nickel.
Hey, we're gone swimming. Swimming in the swimming pool.
I never learned how to swim until I got to Notre Dame, and never did become a very competent swimmer, but all of them learned how to swim at the pool, and that was a big asset as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, swimming was always a big, even when we were farming, we had the pool, and so when the boys would come back from the fields, and Mom and I would fix dinner, we would swim every night in the dark. I mean, swimming was part of our lives. It was the big recreation for us growing up. So for Paul, that was kind of a whole new thing, and he really liked it and liked the opportunity for his children.
Cannonball, splash water everywhere. Then I'll do a swan dive, float right through the air. Hey, we're gone swimming. Swimming in the swimming pool. Yeah, we're gone swimming. Swimming in the swimming pool.
I continue to forget when the lake was created, but Swan Creek was right behind the swimming pool down the hill, and I seemed to know how to fish down there, and it didn't make any difference to me whether I was catching bluegills or carp. They were fish, and so another great opportunity for recreation for me there. Unfortunately for Carol, she had a kitchen that was if you looked at the tile on the floor, there was about 4 feet by 7, maybe.
If that.
Well equipped, range,
Dishwasher.
Was there? It was a dishwasher, refrigerator, but not much counter space.
It was a one-woman kitchen. It was a one-person kitchen.
But by that time, I mean, you're working towards having 8 kids coming out here in the summer. So
we did. We had all 8 plus extras.
So what was it like to go from the Westmoreland house, which I assume was much larger,
Constricting.
to the little house, and how did you how did you cope?
That's the best word I can
Well,
think
part of it is they lived outdoors a lot, but the interesting thing was that all the cousins loved the little house, and so it was not just our children, but the cousins were always over. You know, new toys, new kids. See, they didn't see our children as much in the winter, and so they were at our house a lot. So the house was always the pot boiling. It was hardest when I had a newborn. If the baby was waking up at night, as we got more children, there was no spot for me to be quiet with the baby. And so sometimes I took a crying baby outdoors and just walked. So some summers were tiring. But they loved it so much that I just, I couldn't bear to say, oh, we can't keep doing this, although there came a point where I did say that. And
because at some point, and I don't know when, we sort of left off at Tom, but then there were, I think, 3 others came.
Francie was born in, 70? Is that right?
Right.
She was born in 1970.
Followed by?
Philip, who was born in 72.
And finally?
Eric in 76.
And all that time you're still coming out to the little house and living in Westmoreland.
Right.
Right.
And we're still doing that. And at that time, we also had, we'll get to this later maybe, some of the live-ins.
Let's talk about some of these other people, starting with Kathleen Malone.
Well, Kathleen Malone, God bless Paul. I think when he said I do, I don't know that he knew what he was saying, I do too. But Kathleen was born to my cousin Barbara, who had lived on the farm when I was growing up. I loved her very much. She's quite a bit older than I. She had this baby. She had Kathleen when she was not expecting to have another child by any means. She was working full-time and really had to be working. She was probably 45, and Kathleen was Down syndrome. And Paul and I went to visit her at the hospital. And her husband, Tom, was not there. I don't think he was there the night we visited.
I don't recall.
And Tom was really bitter about this child. He really felt God was punishing him, which is not an unusual thing for a parent to feel, especially then, I think. And they had made the decision that they were going to place Kathleen at Sunshine Home, which is a wonderful, wonderful place. But there was no room for her at that time. And they were going to put her in a foster home. He simply did not want her brought home. So Barbara didn't know what she could do. I mean, she really did have to go back to work, and Tom didn't want the baby at home, and so they had picked out a foster home through one of the social agencies. I don't even remember. We were on our way home from this visit, and I said to Paul, I just can't imagine a relative of ours having a child in a foster home. At this time, we had John and Joe. I had not become pregnant with Gretchen. They said, what would you think of our taking Kathleen until they have a spot for her at Sunshine? And he, without hesitation, said, fine. Fine. What were you thinking?
That she needed a place, a family place. That's what I was thinking.
Well, it turned out to be a great blessing, like all things like that. She was not a difficult child to have. She had a hole in her heart, and so when I fed her, she would get a dusky color around her mouth from lack of oxygen. So the feedings were a little hard, but she was not a child who cried a lot. She was not demanding, which is somewhat typical of Down syndrome babies. I had to do a lot of doctoring with her, but fortunately Barbara's pediatrician and my pediatrician were the same. I loved him. He was like a father to me. He always said to me when I had Kathleen, if you have any problem, you call me. I'll come. And doctors didn't come to the house then. I never had to call him, and I was taking her to a heart specialist. Well, her name came up at Sunshine. And I said, gee, she's doing so well. Why don't we just keep her till the next time around? So we did. Well, Tom and Barbara would come and visit us every Sunday, and it got so Tom was starting to accept her. He could look at her and finally could hold her, and I don't think he would have done that if she had been in a foster home. I just don't think he ever would have seen her. And finally, Barb got him to go out and look at Sunshine, and he saw so many children who were so much worse off than she was, parents who had much more difficult times than they did, that I think it was an eye-opener for him. Well, then I got pregnant, and Dr. Zollinger, my dear pediatrician, said, Carol, you know, the next time her name comes up, you've got to place her because you're going to have twins the very hard way. And it's not fair to your child to do that to her, to it. So when her name came up next, we did place her, and that was tough. I mean, we were very close to her by that time. Paul's parents were I don't think they ever said anything negative about our having her.
No.
They were very loving to her. And because of our association with Kathleen, we, again, united with Barb's kids. We didn't see them much. They were our cousins' kids, but we didn't see them a lot. Well, Michael was 13. Her older brother was 13, and his two older siblings were both going to be working, and Michael was going to be alone. And I said, Barb, how would you like it if Mike came out to the little house with us in the summertime? He could work with the kids, he could live with us, and, you know, you can come out anytime to visit. So that's what we did. Michael spent 3 summers with us until he was 16, and he could get a job. And we had a great time with him. Our kids teased the life out of him. If he did anything that was the least bit unmasculine, they gave him the nickname Gladys, which he took with good grace. But we had a lot of fun with Mike. And he, interestingly enough, is now working with disadvantaged children because of his sister. He used to get on his bike and ride over to Sunshine, which is not too far from the farm, and visit her. And it changed his life.
What happened with Kathleen?
Kathleen died when she was almost 3. She contracted hard measles. There wasn't a vaccine at that time, and she was on her way to the hospital, and the fever took her heart. Her heart was not strong enough to withstand it. Now, if that had happened to her the day after she was born, she would have had an operation. But no such thing then. I mean, they were going to wait till she was old enough to do a heart operation.
So after Kathleen and Mike came Nancy Durst, correct?
Nancy Durst was part of a family that lived in the house that was on this site where we're sitting today. Her dad worked for the Andersons, and I don't know the exact history, but the house was built by Carol's uncle, Dave Anderson, and he ran an orchard down here where the lake is, and ultimately retired to Florida, and the orchard went to pot. But the Durst family was they were like Andersons as far as I was concerned. All the Andersons treated them like family because they were here all the time. The kids mingled with one another and so forth. Well, Nancy, I can't remember where Nancy went to high school. Macaulay, probably. Mm-hmm. Now Toledo Christian School. She decided that she wanted to go to beautician school. And the school was down on Jefferson near 17th Street, I'll say. So why don't we have Nancy come and stay with us, and she can go downtown with me, and I'll drop her off and pick her up on the way home. And so for a school year, mm-hmm. She lived with us and went to school.
Oh, and our kids loved her. She was like having an older sister. Well, she was an older sister to them.
And then I think after Nancy came Sue Pitcher.
Oh, yeah, Sue Pitcher this is a funny story, the way we got Sue. I was taking the kids to buy shoes at Hoskins, and I had 7 of them at that time. No, Francie wasn't born. Or it was just down to Francie. We had 6. And I was taking them all in to get shoes, and of course when we went into this little shoe store, they sort of took it over. There were a lot of little horses that they used to ride on. And Nancy Gallagher the sister-in-law of the people that we had bought our house from saw us all come in, and she said to me, Carol, do you have anybody helping you? And I said, no. And she said, did you ever think of taking a student into your house? I have a student that goes to Marymount's, and I use her as a babysitter. And she said she's sort of like having a live-in maid. And I said, well, I couldn't live with a live-in maid. I mean, if she came, so I had somebody, they'd have to be family. I could not, they'd have to eat with us. And she said, well, did you ever think of doing that? And I said, no. And she said, well, I have a girl that was given to me, a name, and she's a senior, and I don't want to start with a senior. I'm starting again. I've gone through 4 years of this, and I'm going to take another freshman. But you might like her, and if you don't like it, you can, say, well, that's that. So Sue's family lived in Texas, in Beaumont, Texas. He had been moved with the oil company from Toledo to Texas. And she didn't want to live in a dorm. She wanted to live with a family. And if she couldn't find a family to live with, she wasn't going to go back to Marymount's for her senior year. So I was given this name and talked it over with Paul. And again, I said, sure, that's fine. And we had an extra room in our house in Westmoreland. There was what was originally probably a maid's room. It had its own bathroom. It was on a stairway that went down into the kitchen. So I'm sure that's why it was built. And that was empty. And so I said she'd have her room to herself. She could study. It would work out beautifully. So I called her, and sight unseen, either way, we decided on this. And at that time, Francie was the baby. So she was our 6th. So Sue came to our house, bounced in with a couple of her friends in late August when we went back to the house, or early September when we went back to Westmoreland. And to make a very long story short, Sue lived with us 14 years.
And then after Sue, there's...
Ken Phillips lived with us. You tell.
Well,
about
I don't know
Ken.
that I can exactly, but Joe has artistic and musical gifts. And when it was time for him to go to high school, he visited Central and he found out that you could get credit for taking art, which you didn't get much credit for in grade school. And it so happened that Ken Phillips was a new teacher when Joe became a freshman at Central. A strong friendship developed there, and maybe you ought to pick it up from here, but he provided a lot of transportation back and forth, had dinner with us.
Every Sunday, practically.
He's a Renaissance man, I guess I would call him. He would, when we lived in, was he with us in Westmoreland?
Oh, he ate with us a lot in Westmoreland. He wasn't living with us.
But he would come home and play the piano. He's one of these guys who, can you give me a couple of bars of that? And he would play it.
And I'd be fixing dinner, and it was like living in a fancy restaurant because he was playing this gorgeous music while I was preparing the meal. It was great, and he's got a wonderful sense of humor, and just, he was a delight to live with us.
And following Ken, I think we had Chris Zubek.
Well, Chris came because he was going to marry our daughter. They had met at Dayton, and he had a time in between his graduation and the time he was going to do his military duty. He was in ROTC in college, and so he had a military duty to perform. And so he really, actually, Chris didn't live with us, he ate with us. He lived with our son John because his wife-to-be was going to be living here too. We didn't think that was quite decent. So he lived with John and ate with us.
John was single then.
Yes. And he ate with us. But also the kids came back. Almost all of our kids at some point have lived with us after they were married when they were moving into a house or something like that. So we've had a number of experiences with our sons-in-law and daughters-in-law that have all been fun.
So then we have the Stone family. You want to talk a little bit about them? That's a little different situation.
That's a different situation, but it's a wonderful situation.
Those are Carol's cousins.
Sue Stone was Sue Finkbeiner Stone. She is my first cousin, and unfortunately, she and her husband separated very quickly as far as I was concerned, and she called me in November and told me what had happened, and she said, I don't know what I'm going to do about Christmas.
They have 4 children at this point.
And their 4 children are pretty much, we have 4 children about the same ages. And so I said, well, you're going to come and spend Christmas with us, which they did. And it became, I think they were here for 6 Christmases, but it was about a week's time that they would be here. And so, and we usually had, we always had Sue, we had Ken during that time, we had exchange students. There were 2 Christmases I know that we had 17 living in the house. They had an absolute ball together. They ate and ate and ate and ate, and they played, and they sit at this card table over here and play euchre until the middle of the night, and they bring the Christmas cookies in stacks of boxes and eat Christmas cookies and play cards into the wee hours of the night. One of the boys, the youngest Stone boy, would come in and he'd race right upstairs and he'd weigh himself because he said it was a failure if he didn't gain at least 5 pounds during Christmas vacation. And then they spent a week with us every summer. So our children have become very close. And so it's, you know, a bad thing that, I guess it's the silver lining that we found with that story.
Well, in addition to all these people who we've discussed, there were also some exchange students that came through, correct?
4. You tell them.
Well,
Start with.
you keep putting this burden on me to remember all this stuff.
Well, I think you can.
Well,
You can. He was here.
the first one was from someplace down south.
Chile.
That's what I said. And he came to Toledo, and he didn't have a place to stay, and the woman who was in charge of the Youth for Understanding organization prevailed upon us to have him for an afternoon and dinner, and I guess we did that maybe a couple of days, and finally we had so much fun at dinner with Lito. One by one, the children went over to Carol and said, why doesn't Lito stay with us? He'd be fun to have. So Lito came and stayed, and
They were only allowed out of their countries for 6 months. So, but he was just, and we still hear from him regularly. He's great.
he calls on the 4th of July,
Yeah.
for example, to wish us
That's
a
when
happy.
Happy Independence
July.
Day.
That's when he left, and he called us from New York on the 4th, and he was in tears because he was leaving.
Who followed Lito?
Pardon?
Eggy.
Eggy, yes.
Yeah.
Egbert's from Holland. Egbert's butt is about 4 inches wide. He's about 6'3", something like that. He dove right into activities at Central Catholic. He was a senior when Gretchen was a freshman, and he became an unofficial cheerleader, poster maker at all of her volleyball games and basketball games. And he also remains very close to us.
We've
And
remained
then
close.
came Shinji from Tokyo, and Shinji was also a bright bulb, but he decided that this was kind of a holiday year for him. Collectively, we chose Springfield for him, and Shinji is a so-called typical Japanese in that he's about 5'8", and first thing he wanted to do was play football. And so he went out for football, and we went to Parents' Night. This is really the only formal sport recognition or recollection that I have. We go to Parents' Night, and they're playing Swanton, and the Springfield's coach has got to find a place for Shinji, so he's going to be on the kickoff receiving team. And my vision that I can look at right now is this big purple 74 from Swanton roaring down the field and going right over the top of Shinji, and all he saw was the stadium lights.
Oh, we had lots of fun. Lots of fun with all of them.
Who was one more?
Claudia is the last.
Claudia's the only girl that we had, and she was from Bremen, Germany. Claudia was from a very unfortunate background. She was sent. And right before Christmas time, late in November, I guess it was, I heard her on the phone talking to her mom, and I could tell something was very wrong. And she said to me, "Mom, I have to go home to Germany. There's something that I have to, that's wrong, going on that's wrong, and I have to go back home, but I'll come back." And I said, "That's fine." She said, my mother is willing to pay for it. So anyway, she went off. She called me, sobbing. "What's wrong, Claudia?" She said, "You're going to hate me." I said, "Claudia, there's nothing you could have done that I will hate you for. What is the problem?" She said, "I'm pregnant, Mom." I said, "Oh, Claudia." She said, "But I want to come home. Here, home." She said, "I want to have Christmas with the family." I said, "You may." I said, "The problem is that I have to tell YFU, Youth for Understanding, the situation, and you won't be allowed to go back to school," because in those days pregnant girls couldn't go back to school. And I said, "You won't be under their auspices, so any expenses incurred will have to be your family's." And she said, "That's okay." So she came back, and we discussed how we'd tell the children, which was a little dicey because some of them were young. And she was very concerned, especially about Tom, because Tom was her age and he was very black and white about things at the time. Our kids all were so wonderful about it. But we've pretty much lost contact with her. She doesn't like the boys. I think it's a little more difficult for her. I think the whole thing was a little more difficult. But we all loved her. She was a great gal. That last summer at the little house, I said to Paul, I really can't take many more summers like this. I go home so tired. I feel like I've been in battle fatigue because of the constant inundation of people and no privacy, not even the bathroom. It seems to me I always had a child on my lap when I went to the bathroom. So I said, we've either got to add on to our house in Westmoreland so we can be near Papa, or we've got to look for a bigger house. Or we have to build on the farm if we can. So you go from there.
Well, the Dursts had left this house. Children are gone, and we finally decided we thought we wanted to build, and we engaged Jim McGowan to help us with that. So my wife / architect and he got together, and she cut out, with a few small exceptions, cut out all the furniture on paper, and when we moved in here, the movers just looked at the chart and put number 12 over here and number 6 over here.
When did you move into this house? Which year was that?
1979.
Where music fills the air.
The dock's older than Olivia. They were still in Colorado when they built the dock.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, we moved in 1979.
One of the interesting processes when we built the house, and I don't know if Jim does it with all of his clients, but he said, write a narrative of the way you live. And from that, he started drawing plans, and that was really interesting because, what I envisioned was sort of a nice fishing lodge. I wanted a very comfortable house. We wanted it very family-oriented. We wanted a place where every single inch of it was used. We didn't want an extra room that was beautiful that we wouldn't use. The family would use a not so. We just wanted to be able to live in it.
You're in the great room, by the way, just in case you didn't recognize it.
Didn't call it the great room then, but at any rate, so from that he started drawing plans, and we just would revise as we wanted, and we ended up with a house that we really loved. We've arranged it so that we can live on this floor. We have everything on this floor. We don't have to. The boys were up, the girls were down.
We tried to get the girls to understand that Angola is only 68 miles away, something like that. So eloping would be very convenient. Just open the slider down there, up the steps, and there's no risk of injury or anything like that, but it didn't work out that way.
Nobody took us up on that. Even before we were married, I think you were in on helping with the egg dyeing and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
Mom's.
Carol's mother always dyed eggs so that they could be hidden outside for the the egg hunt, and I participated in a lot of that.
Mom and Dad had 57 grandchildren. Now, of course, they didn't at the time we were married, but Dad always dreamed that he would have one place where the whole family could get together, and that's why the activities building was built. It was built for business purposes, but it was also built so that we could all be under one roof because we outgrew their house years before that. We had a grill that was an outside grill where we used to have picnics. But the activities building was built, and so we always had a great big Christmas party for all of the grandchildren and children. It was a hamburger. It was not a fancy party. It was hamburgers that we fixed on a grill out there, and Mom bought presents for every single one of the grandchildren. I always went with her. We would do them in groups. You know, the 9-year-olds got a doll, and every group got the same thing. And so the Christmas parties were great fun. And then as the kids got older, we started putting on programs at the Christmas party. Each family would take a year where they were in charge of
The entertainment.
nonsense. I mean, just total nonsense. The whole family's pretty silly, and we have a lot of fun together, and all of us like to laugh, and so we put on all sorts of silly shows, and the older boys performed stunts, and oh gosh, we just had a lot of fun. So the Christmas party was a great memory for all of us. Now our families, now that we all have our own big families, Paul and I have a Christmas party, and we have our Christmas out at the activities building on Christmas. We're the family that takes it on Christmas Day, and so our children have their Christmas dinner out there, and we've gone from a very elaborate Christmas dinner to a much simpler Christmas dinner because the kids don't care a hoot about the dinner anyway. They want to play with their cousins, and we have gift giving and so forth. And
But again, the idea started with your father.
Mom and Dad.
As the family grew, wanted to be sure everybody was together.
Right, and that was not on Christmas Day itself. It was, I think, 2 days before Christmas, Paul. I think it was the 23rd that we used to meet. But it was just something the children always looked forward to because I think every big family is this way. Our kids are still this way when they see their cousins at church. It's as if they hadn't seen them for years. Well, they see them every week or every 2 days, and it's the same in the summer when they're all swimming together. They're so happy to see one another.
When you're the best of friends, having so much fun together, you're not even aware you're such a funny pair. You're the best of friends. Life's a happy game.
It's one of our pleasures now to see our children in this house all together and how much fun they have. How glad they are to be together.
What else did you used to do out here? Was there something about a toboggan run or a toboggan slide? Is that out here or somewhere else?
Well, the original one is in the woods, but it's pretty much long gone. And that one went down the hill and through the woods and across the creek and up the side, and we used to ice it, and that was before Paul. So I don't think...
A long time before
Yeah, you
me.
never saw that. But Dick, right between our house and Dick's house, built this marvelous toboggan slide. Dick never does anything but first-class jobs, and this was a wonderful toboggan slide. And they would ice that too, and the kids could go. If it was a good run, they would shovel way out on the lake, and it could go all the way to the far shore. It would go that fast. And then, of course, some of our crazy kids, our son Philip, used to go down, water it, and go down on sleds in the summertime standing up. I mean, they did ridiculous things. Well, I think the insurance companies got hold of the fact that maybe that was a little dangerous, some of the things that were going on, and no one but Dick's family was allowed to use it. And Dick said, if nobody but my family can use it, nobody can use it, because we're not going to have something that the kids can't all use. So that was the demise. Now he hangs his ladders on his toboggan slide. That was the demise of the toboggan slide. Oh, we're so lucky with our friends. Part of it is they stayed in Toledo, and that isn't happening with our children's friends, unfortunately. But I remember the first time, I kept Paul very quiet. Well, all my close friends were married or in the convent. I have 2 close friends who are sisters. But I kept him very quiet until I was sure that this was the real thing. And I remember the first time I took him someplace, everybody knew him. And this high school group of ours have stuck together. My own friends, there are 10 of us who go every summer and have a slumber party still after all these years. And
Devil's Lake has never been the same.
we're not quite like teenagers anymore, but we talk half the night. We're still doing silly things.
A lot more emphasis on slumber.
Yeah, more slumber and less talk than there used to be. But Paul and the other husbands have become good friends.
I think it starts with Sheila Otto.
Right.
When we're new in Westmoreland, Sheila is out with a stroller and a beagle, and Carol is out with a stroller and a beagle, and they meet on the sidewalk and decide that they are looking in a mirror, and so that's how we became acquainted with Ray and Sheila.
We were still on Bancroft then.
Were we? Or were you?
Yeah, sure,
Okay.
because we had a beagle then, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, they introduced us to some Westmoreland people and some non-Westmoreland people. And there was, and I guess still is, an organization called the Christian Family Movement. And so we became involved with that. And we still meet with those people socially for dinner. We don't do any so-called activities anymore, but while we were honeymooning, 5 couples met and had a lobster dinner in somebody's home, and 2 of those couples happened to be Carol's brothers, and the 5 of them decided they would invite us to join so we could meet every 2 months at somebody's home. It worked out very nicely on the calendar. So that group has persisted until I'd say about 2 years ago maybe. Again, we've lost some people from that group, and some of the survivors are not in great shape physically, so.
I thought it would be fun just to go through each of your children. Just a little quick story. And I'd also like you to say what the nickname is, because I know nicknames is a big thing in the family.
Are you going to do it, or do you want me to tell the
We
funny?
kind of revised that a little bit.
However you want to do it.
Yeah, you okay?
I'm fine.
Yeah,
Maybe-
I have a story about
Yeah,
Joe
that's-
and
that's
John
fine.
that I just think it's a story dear to my heart.
Let's say that Joe, John. Okay, do they have nicknames?
John was called Ta by Joe because he couldn't say John, and it became out here on the farm Taz and then Tazi Wazi. This is a family plague. I mean, we all have silly nicknames that are corrupted from one from another, you know, and so he eventually became Taz. Joe became Yeoman, and I don't know, and I don't know which one of his cousins called him Yeoman, but he's still on his napkin ring. I think I still have Yeoman written on, and John says Tazi Wazi on it, as I recall. But at any rate, this story is when they were in high school, and I was pregnant with Eric, and we had not told them that we were expecting a baby, and they were teenagers, and John was almost 16 and Joe was almost 15, and I thought, oh boy, how are they going to react? You don't think of your parents as lovers, that's for sure. And they were old enough to think maybe that was kind of gross, you know, and I thought. So Joe had gone out Christmas shopping with me, and I was getting to the point where I knew we had to tell them because I was not feeling well and I had varicose veins and I was supposed to go into Job's stockings, and I kept saying to Paul, you know, the minute we do that, they'll know. So Joe said to me, Mom, we were on our way home from Christmas shopping and I was just exhausted, and he says, Mom, you don't act like yourself. Are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just tired. He said, you're more than tired. I said, well, I don't feel real good. And he said, is there anything really wrong with you? And I said, well, what do you think it might be? And he looked at me and he said, you're pregnant? And I said, yes. And he said, oh, Mom. He was ecstatic. He loves babies. To this day, he loves babies. And I said, he said, Mom, you've got to tell John right away. They roomed together. They had a room together. He said, I cannot keep it a secret. I said, oh, yes, you can. I said, you know, I want to be able to, this just happened, and you don't want to call people in and say, well, guess what? Well, I'm sorry. I cannot sleep in the same room with him unless you tell him. So I got home, and I said to Paul, the cat is out of the bag. Joe knows. What was the reaction? He's ecstatic. He says, well, you're going to have to tell John, aren't you? Yes, I am. So I went up to our bedroom to put stuff away, and their bedroom was between a bathroom and their room was their room. I called John in, and he said, what's wrong? And I said, well, I'm telling you this because Joe insists that you know this because he's so excited about it. He said, you're going to have another baby in the house. And he burst into tears. And I was so shocked. John is not openly emotional, usually. I was just so shocked, and I said, John, what's wrong? He said, oh, Mom, I'm never going to know this baby. I'm going to go off to college. He's going to grow up. I'll never know him. I thought, what an adult reaction. And then he said, and I thought it's about time for you and Dad to have some time to yourself. I thought, well, those are two reactions that I really, really did not expect. But I said, John, you know, you're going to be so close to this baby. It'll be a different relationship from your other brothers and sisters, and they are. They're very close.
And that would, of course, be...
That's Eric.
Eric.
That's Eric, yeah.
How about Gretchen?
You want to hear about Gretchen, do you?
Yeah. Does Gretchen have a nickname?
Midets.
Well,
Midets is what they called her when she was little, because when Kay asked her, who are you? And she says, Midets. I am Gretchen. Midets. She was little too, maybe. So she was Midets for Kay's family for the rest of the time. She still calls her Midets.
Well, she demonstrated some athletic ability early in her life, and I guess the one of the prominent memories is when we were in Westmoreland, we had a basketball backboard, and it was right outside the dining room window, actually. And many is the day that she was out there with 9 black boys playing basketball, and I'm sure that's how some of her basketball skills were developed. When she got to Central, she played volleyball in the fall, basketball in the winter, and ran track in the spring. And I could take you upstairs and show you a pair of Kelly green corduroys that the wales are virtually flat by virtue of my rubbing my hands on my thighs when she's at the free throw line, and the free throws are important. And get those suckers in, please.
And then she ended up playing volleyball for the University of Notre Dame.
Yeah, she played volleyball at Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. I should add to Gretchen's accolades, she was valedictorian at Central. So all that activity didn't take away from the classroom.
No. The next one is Sue, whom we call Do.
Sue is due?
Sue is due because Gretchen couldn't say Sue. She called her Due, and it ended up Dewey.
A lot of our children are retarded.
Yeah, right.
Or were early anyway.
Well, Dewey, the thing I remember most about Dewey, Gretchen was winning lots of accolades. She had lots of, I don't know how many, I think she had 15 varsity letters.
Yeah.
And Dewey was an average athlete. She was better than she thought she was. But she was never in the limelight. Her sister was always in the limelight. But I would come home having gone to one of Gretchen's games, and I'd be tired, and I would have a lot of ironing to do, and I knew I had to do it before I went to bed, and I'd go downstairs to the laundry room and turn on the light, and there would be a note on the ironing board, "Mom, I noticed you had shirts to iron. They're finished." She would have been ironing the shirts while I was away watching Gretchen's game, and I used to say, "Dew, you're the one who needs the trophies." She was she's still that kind of a person. She's a very giving girl.
Tom?
Oh my. Thomas,
Does he have a nickname, Thomas?
I don't know.
Oh yeah, Tommy Tittlemouse is what we called him when he was little. Tommy Tittlemouse. And Mr. T, we called him too. There was a character on television who was kind of big. Tom was very big, and we called him Mr. T.
Tom was very strong physically and had a lot of bulk. I think he was 6'1" or 2" when he went into St. John's, and St. John's has an event called Field Day. It's a spring picnic and mess around outside, and the track coach had the iron shots out in the yard someplace, and I'm sure he knew that Tom existed. This was when he was a freshman, and so he invited him over to try to throw that, and I don't know how many times he threw it, but it ended up that he threw it further than the varsity thrower was throwing at that time, so that began a shot putting and discus throwing career for Tom, which he pursued through St. John's and ended his high school career second in Ohio. So he goes to Notre Dame and he's throwing, and he's out in at where was it, Stanford or Santa Clara or someplace. He's out there for a meet with the team, and Carol gets a call from a fella in California. "Do you have a son named Tom?" "Yes." "Well, I'm Charlie Smith, and I'm out in
San Francisco,
California, and I think there's been a mix-up in our bags." And he said, "I'm here with my girlfriend to enjoy a weekend," and she picked up her bag, and she found the biggest pair of shoes she's ever seen in her life, size 15. And so, "Well, how did you ever find us?" "Well, there was a card in the bag from the Cornell track coach. This guy calls the Cornell track coach, and, "Do you have a Tom Kraus on your team?" He said, "No, I wish we did, but he's at Notre Dame." So the guy called Notre Dame and finds out where the track team is, and ultimately connects with Tom, and the bags get switched, and she's back to her lingerie, and Tom competes in the track meet.
Francie's next. Francie was, oh golly, Francie was our kooky teenager. Francie was a very good student, but she was the stylish one. She had to follow all the latest. She spent a whole...
From Goodwill.
Yeah, she spent a whole year shopping at Goodwill. She would come home with these deals. "Mom, isn't this the coolest coat?" It would be rolled up. It would be way too big. It looked horrible to me. I'd say, "Well, we have to clean it before..." I'm thinking, I don't know what kind of rats have been running over the top of this coat. Anyway, for a year, I didn't see one whole eye of Francie. Francie had a hairdo that covered her eye. That was the style. But, you know, you pick your battles, and that was certainly not a battle that I was going to pick. She was an excellent student. She was a good girl. She was just very funny. Well, she's turned out to be quite a fashion plate. She's a very stunning-looking woman, and she's still very elegant, and it's, believe me, she's not shopping from Goodwill anymore, I don't think.
Francie have a nickname?
Francie never did. She was always
Well,
just...
I call her Fernk.
Fern. Oh, yeah, sure.
F-R-N-K. I
Yes,
don't know
Fern.
exactly where that came from.
And
but
her cousins call her Fern. That's right.
So she
Yeah,
she has
does.
one.
I always call her Francie. Right.
why don't you continue with Phil? So I get to talk about Eric.
Oh, you want to talk about Eric?
He wants to talk about Eric.
Okay. Yeah, Phil was one of those guys that pushed the envelope when he was going through school. He was always just sort of on the edge of trouble. He was very bright, never worked very hard, got by on just not having to work very hard, but was never motivated. I always thought, oh gosh, he has turned into the most marvelous adult, parent. I mean, all the things that he went through, he has learned his lessons so well. And he's married a girl that is just so complimentary to him. Their personalities, they're such good parents. They parent so well together. I look at him and I just shake my head and think, oh, Phil. But all the time that we were having little difficulties with him, he was never, ever rebellious. Our other kids weren't either, but I would expect it from Phil's personality. But he was always admitted his mistakes, said you're right, the punishment was fair, never rebelled, and he's still just a really sweet guy.
And he was afflicted with ulcerative colitis, which is a very bad thing to have. Disease affecting his colon, and he suffered through a lot of agony with that, and ultimately had his colon removed at the Cleveland Clinic. And that's been how many years ago? Quite a few.
Their first baby was 6 weeks old when this happened to him. But he's the poster child for that operation. He's very healthy. And he's now a teacher. And there's nothing, he said the first day he started teaching, he said to me, Mom, I'm going to take a picture of you and show the boys your white hair and tell them I did this to her, so don't think there's any trick that I don't know. And he probably was right.
Well, we talked a little bit earlier about Eric. Eric has become the fisherman that I would like to be and beyond. When I read fishing magazines over the years, it always encouraged teaching children how to fish, and I wanted to do that I tried that with everybody, but he was the one who was most accepting. But when he was about 2, I took him out in the boat expecting to stay about 15 minutes, and I was out there 3 hours with him. He's catching a bluegill every so often, but his mouth is going like a magpie, and I thought there was pretty good evidence that he was related to my sweetheart because of the similar capacity to be loquacious, shall we say. When he went to college at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, and when he was a senior, we got a letter from the Parents Association saying they would like to have a picture of him as a youth so they could put it in a book with all the other members of the class, youth, graduate. We could only find pictures of him with a fish in his hand, and he suffered from being the last child. We have 12 pictures of him and 48 of John or something like that.
You know, before we go on, I just want to say that we haven't talked about our in-laws. And, you know, with 8 children...
You mean our children's?
Our children's in-laws. Spouses. I guess we're the in-laws. We have been so lucky with our children's mates. They are just such a wonderful bunch. They're very much our kids. And in a big family like this, there are always going to be rough edges. There are people that rankle each other, but you don't know it when they're together. They are so kind to one another. They're so good to us, every one of them. We are just so, so blessed. There isn't the one that we wouldn't have picked out.
Stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me.
If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall,
And the mountains should crumble into the sea,
I won't cry, no, I won't cry. I won't shed a tear,
just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me.
You know, well, in the summertime on Fridays, all of the girls, daughters and daughters-in-law, and all of the children come and eat lunch and swim. And during the winter time, the daughters and daughters-in-law who have preschoolers come for lunch, and the kids play and the women talk. So we have and that's been wonderful for me. I hope it's been wonderful for them. It's certainly been wonderful for the children. They have they look forward to that, of course. And we're getting fewer and fewer preschoolers because our children are growing up, although we have a new baby. Eric and Tom and their wives both have young families, so they live miles apart. But fortunately, Eric went to school in Minneapolis, so he has friends there, so he goes to Minneapolis, and Tom comes home, of course, with Paul and the kids. More brunches now than dinners, because the children all love brunch. We go to church. There are 5 of us who all go to St. Joan of Arc's parish, so, and the 6th goes, it lives in Rossford. Joe lives in Rossford, but they often come and go to Mass with us on the Sundays that we have brunch. So about once a month, I would say, we get together for brunch. And there are about 36 of us that have brunch together. And then the kids, depending on the weather, the little ones all go down and play in the rec room. The big ones now, the older ones, are now sitting around and talking because they like to be with the adults.
Who's cooking the food for the brunch?
I am. Yeah.
Starts on Thursday.
Yeah, it takes me about 3 days of working, getting the table set and getting the food in and getting everything ready. But
And as of this year, 2009, and we're in March, how many grandchildren are we talking about?
Well, we have 26 now, and we're expecting a phone call within the next couple of weeks that Paula's had our 27th. So we're anxious to see what that 27th will be.
In terms of basketball, we have 18 shirts and 8 skins.
The 8 skins are very anxious for another boy.
Raising 8 children, not to mention all the other people who came through, would sound like maybe daunting to others, but to the two of you, it did not seem that way. I mean, how did you do it?
Well, look what we were given.
Yeah, we were given an awful lot.
We never had to worry about finances. Our son Eric said something wonderful to me one day. He said, Mom, the whole time we were raised, we never felt wealthy, but we always felt cared for. And that's what we aimed to do. We were wealthy in what we were given in other things other than money. I mean, we both had good parents, wonderful parents. We have faith, a common shared faith, which we think is so important to both of us. We live in a beautiful place. Some of these kids that I worked with in Casa wouldn't know what something beautiful is. They wouldn't be touched by it because they don't know how to react to it. We have beauty around us all the time. We've been given so many gifts. How could it not be an easy life? We've had good health. We've had support from a huge, wonderful family. It isn't daunting. We didn't have 8 altogether. We had 1 at a time, and we really have had hardly any worries. I mean, I think about how lucky we've been. You can't compare our life with somebody else. I mean, somebody with 2 can have a much tougher time than we had, because we got so many pluses on all sides of us.
Some people would say, you know, 8 is enough, but you opened your house to others.
We've learned how to give. That's really what it kind of give and
Well,
share, if you please.
Yeah. We've also learned that if you give, you get. I mean, casting your bread on the waters is definitely not a myth. It always comes back. It always comes back. And so if you have the means and the ability and the inclination and you do it, you know. Sometimes it's a selfish thing. My dad used to talk about intelligent selfishness, which I always used to say, Dad, that's charity. Well, charity is intelligent selfishness, because when you do something charitable, you end up getting so much more than what you've given. And we've learned that over and over again. And I absolutely believe it's true. And we can't pat ourselves on the back because, as I say, we've been given so much ourselves and still are getting it. We get it from our kids. Our kids are so good to us.
Any other thoughts along the lines of what we're talking about, as you know who will be listening to this, and maybe thoughts for them as they live their lives, what they can learn from the two of you?
Give.
Yeah.
Give and share.
Right. And don't always be looking for the big thing. It's the daily little things that you do that make a life rich.
Don't give with the idea of getting a return.
Yeah. You'll get it.
If it comes in whatever form, that's great. If it doesn't, that's great too. You
can give in so many. You don't have to give the way we've given. You don't have to have a life of giving by having 8 children. You can do it in lots of other ways. The world's hungry for all kinds of gifts from people. I don't mean monetary gifts. I mean gifts of self. And they've got a wide open field. Certainly now, the world's hungry for their gifts. And I hope they use them.
When I write my monthly check to St. Joan of Arc, I write rent in the memo line. Because all this stuff is not ours. I'm just renting it.
Yeah, I hope they believe that too, that this is a gift. This is not something they own. This is something they use. It's not theirs.
But don't you touch my fishing rod.